long-suffering person who's Hi everybody, welcome to It's All Write with Suzette, where we're going to spend half an hour talking about the craft of writing. I'm your host, Suzette Standring, and today we have a great show on inspiring young people to write. And we have two students with us today from Pierce Middle School, and we have a teacher, Erin F. who's going to be talking to us about the challenges of getting young people to write and what motivates them, and what better way to start our show by listening to some of the stellar writing examples by our very own students here at Milton. So first of all, I'd like to introduce two of our students. We're going to have Dominique Thomas. She is the daughter of Elizabeth and Cecil Thomas here in Milton. And we also have Zoe Malouf. She's the daughter of Elizabeth Matson and John Malouf. And they're going to start by reading their pieces today on the show. And then we're going to get to our important guest here, Erin F. their teacher.
Okay, so we just recently finished a unit on short stories, and I decided to read a piece of my short story.
Okay.
I had spent most of the first 8 years of Mary's life with her. We were a good team, she and I. On sunny summer Sundays, we would walk, hand in hand, to the city park, where we could enjoy the quiet and calm scenery amidst the hustling, bustling city. It was relaxing. Sometimes I would get her a balloon. No matter how many color options there were, she always chose the lilac one, which complemented her flowy yellow dress. Hold on tight, I would remind her. I am, Pops, she would say. I won't let go. But eventually, she would let go, and we would watch in awe as the balloon floated until it was a purple dot in the sky. Mary is my everything.
That's beautiful, Dominique.
Thank you.
Can you give us a little background about what that story is about? Who's Mary?
So my short story is called Floating Balloons, and it's about a grandfather who is very sad because he got diagnosed with polio. And he used to spend a lot of his life with his granddaughter Mary, who is very important to him. But because he has polio, he has a lot of difficulty walking because he's slightly paralyzed. So he thinks that he can't spend time with her anymore because he can't move physically.
And is this story based on fiction or history or?
It's based on fiction and a little bit of fiction and a documentary that I watched on TV.
Fantastic.
I'm really
Thank
into
you.
documentaries.
Thank you, Dominique. And now we have Zoe Malouf. You're going to read a piece that you wrote in class.
Yeah, it's a poem from our civil rights unit we had around Martin Luther King Day. So it's called Ode to Freedom. Here's to dreams that give us hope, that keep us going, that let us fly. Here's to love that bonds us together, that will live forever, that lets us live. Here's to change that will make us different, that will help us understand, that lets us start over. Here's to freedom that will always ring, that makes us equal, that lets us overcome.
Oh, that's beautiful, Zoe.
Thank you.
Now, do you gravitate toward poetry?
Yeah, I like poetry mostly because it's free. Like, you can do whatever you want in poetry.
And do you write a lot of it on your own?
Well, sometimes I try it at my house, but we're doing poetry unit right now in writing class, so we write a lot of poems per day.
And when you're writing, where do you draw your inspiration?
Mostly from other pieces of writing. Like, if I hear something I like, I'll maybe use a word such like that in another poem, or copy the same format of it. Say I like a haiku I might try something like that.
I love haiku. I think that it's so simple, but it's not that easy.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. So now we're going to talk to Erin F. Power, their teacher at Milton. Erin won Teacher of the Year in 2011, and in 2012 she won the Horace Mann Lincoln Fellowship, and she was the Massachusetts Teachers Representative at the Lincoln Library in Springfield, Illinois. She's been teaching in the Milton public school system for 20 years. She began as a 5th grade teacher, and now she teaches at Pierce Middle School, and she is the teacher of these two lovely ladies. Memoir is her passion, and she's going to be talking to us today about how she motivates her students. So welcome, Erin. Thanks for making the time today.
Thank you for having us. So how do I motivate students? It depends, I think, day to day. I think the best way to motivate a writer is to give them the confidence to write. So I think once a student, you're able to tap in to their voice, and I think really help them to understand that writing is a process. So once you understand that it's a process and it's not supposed to be perfect that first time, you know, think of the term rough draft, it's supposed to be rough and bumpy and ugly and messy. So I think once you sort of take that weight off a child, that it can be messy, then I think it takes a lot of pressure off and sort of opens up, you know, the mind to being able to write more freely.
I do think it's a special talent, though, when you're talking about teaching a large group of children, and you say you try to lift that burden of pressure from them. So how do you start? How do you help them find their individual voice when you're dealing with a group?
Well, Zoe actually tapped into something that is something we do in class a lot, is we use mentor texts. So for a child to be able to see, and think about it, when you're a child and your parents are always reading to you, right? So we read to young children, and that's how it's modeled to them. That's how they learn to read. They pick up inflection, they learn new words. No one really models writing for a child at a young age. So we do a lot of modeling. It can be me modeling writing. It can be me finding a text that's very rich, maybe in figurative language, and using that. And then that is sort of a jumping point for someone. So someone, maybe Dominique and Zoe, will get one word, and boom, they're off. Maybe for someone else, they'll need me to maybe frame it out a little more for them. And so I sort of model maybe how I would set it up, and then let them, I don't want to say like a Mad Lib, sometimes at the very beginning, sometimes it is like that, until they're able to maybe more independently write something on their own. So a lot of mentor text, a lot of modeling.
Like sparking your creativity with words or visuals or how other people do it.
Like I'll put up a picture when we were doing, I was teaching how to write dialogue. So I'd show a picture of like, maybe it was a woman and an old man, or the old woman and the kind of punk rock boy. And then I said create, I call it like on-demand writing. So here's a picture right now without too much thinking. Sometimes the more thinking you have, the worse it is.
Yes.
So we call it on demand, right? For 5 minutes, a conversation that's taking place between these two.
Do you think that there's a direct correlation to children who like to read are better writers naturally?
I do. I do, because you automatically will have the language at your, and you're getting, all right, so we use mentor text. I'm purposely using them. When we did short story, we probably went through 5 or 6. We looked at Langston Hughes's Yes Ma'am, because that's very dialogue driven. Then we looked at 11, I can't think of the author, that's more in a monologue. So for the children to be able to say, hey, you know, I kind of like a story that's more dialogue driven, or I like inner monologue. If you're not a reader, that's so, you don't have that experience, you don't have those texts to draw from. So they can't just be coming from writing class. So I think the more you're reading outside, you're going to be able to connect even things we're learning in the classroom outside.
Well, let me ask you, Dominique, when you started to get into writing, what do you think was the biggest challenge for you? Was there some kind of insecurity you had to overcome, or some kind of an obstacle, or what kind of difficulty did you have, if any?
Well, when I was little, I wasn't afraid to like put all my ideas out on paper. I wrote a lot of short stories when I was little, but now I have the idea, I just don't know how to get it all on paper. And I'm usually focused with getting it all right the first time, not considering the rough draft.
I see. So you tend your obstacle is being a little too critical in your creativity. You want it perfect the first time around, is that it? Yeah, that's really common among a lot of writers. And what about you, Zoe? What was your challenge?
Similar to Dominique's, like I always have this great idea and then I can't, like maybe I'll have this great idea for a poem, but then I can't write it out, or I don't think of like what to use, or sometimes I find like a good line to use in the story or a poem or whatever I'm writing, but then I can't write around it. I can only get that line out on paper, and then the rest of it I'm kind of like, what should I write here?
Specifically, if the poem has to be a certain way, like we learned about limericks today, the first line, the second line, and the last line need to rhyme and have the same amount of syllables. And the third and fourth line need to rhyme.
Yes. Yeah. And you also touch on something that you write something like, say, a phrase that you really like and you don't want to get rid of it. You'll try and find a whole way to create a paragraph around it. I have the same problem. So we have about 5 minutes before the segment. So Erin, let me ask you, what kind of environment do you try to create to overcome that inner critic in the children?
I mean, definitely a positive sort of workshop environment where it's very, I would not call it a strict environment, sort of workshopy, where we start off modeling, they peer edit a lot. So my goal in September, October is really to get them comfortable in the classroom, sharing their work, because it is scary putting yourself out there and getting up and sharing your inner thoughts, particularly if it's, I think, poetry, you know, where it tends to be more emotional, memoir, your short story, it's sort of bearing a piece of your soul. So you have to be in a room, you have to have an environment that's comfortable. I would have to if I was going to be sharing my work.
I completely agree with you, because I know so many great writers who hold back because they're so afraid of the criticism, or maybe they've gone through criticism and it's kind of left a bad mark with them. So that's really important. And so what do you find helps you feel kind of free and creative in class?
I think that mostly looking at other writers helps me, because there are some writers I like their style. For instance, Inside Out and Back Again is kind of a whole narrative poem, and I like the way that's set up because it's a poem but it tells a story. And when I write poems, I like breaking up my lines at certain points so you can really get the message across.
That's great.
We just did line breaks in white space. So that was a huge sort of aha moment for how a poet really makes those mindful choices of where to end the line on the poem.
I see. Well, you know, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about the process of writing and how to motivate students, your children, to become writers and to become freer and more comfortable in their written expression. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in a moment. Hi, and we're back again, and our subject today is helping young people write. We're here with Erin Power, the 6th grade teacher of Zoe Malouf and Dominique Thomas, and we're talking about inspiring and motivating children to find their written expression. So let me ask you, we talked about the connection between reading and writing. Do you find that there are significant differences when you're teaching children, say, in the 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade? What is the differences in their ability to write or their openness to write?
I think one of the biggest differences is they don't really have the handle on figurative language probably as much. So sort of that rich part of writing you don't always find in their writing. Also, we just did a lesson on sentence fluency, Like, so we kind of go by the 6 traits of what strong writers do. They have voice, they have organization, they choose their words really carefully. Sentence fluency is one of those lessons that I think wakes up a lot of students coming in from elementary, because they tend to write very subject, predicate, subject, predicate, subject, predicate. So it sounds very robotic. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that? So
You might want to tell the readers, I mean the viewers a little more, because maybe they're a little rusty.
So sentence
subject
fluency is
predicate.
like the rhythm and the flow of the writing. So when every sentence starts with noun, verb, the boy ran down the street, the boy like this, the dog, that's okay, it's perfectly fine when they're in elementary school to write like that. But to push their writing forward, there are tricks for, flipping the sentence around so that you have to, you start some with verbs. The importance of verbs in writing. Verbs really drive the writing, where a lot of kids tend to go to the adjectives,
Yes.
thinking like 5 adjectives in a row makes writing strong. It's really one strong verb. Verbs are the action, it's the story. So even moving away from those linking verbs. So a lot of people now, teaching grammar is not glamorous. It's not one of people's favorite things to learn, but if you don't know the names of the parts of speech, learning how to maneuver them in the sentence to help your sentence is a really hard thing to do.
That's so true. It came later in my writing career where I realized that too many adjectives is not very effective. Very flowery. That's what my husband used to say. My early writing was overwrought.
Well, I find if I'm reading something that's heavy adjectives, I'm like kind of skimming it, waiting to get to the action part. Not to say adjectives aren't important. A well-placed adjective has its place, but definitely we tend to focus more on the verbs.
Now, when you're learning to write, I'm sure that there have been moments, aha moments, where you say to yourself, oh, that's a pretty cool tool, or that's a creative way about going about it. Have you had any of those kind of little epiphanies or aha moments where you say, oh, I really like haiku, or whatever?
I liked figurative language because it's not exactly like the reader kind of has to figure out what you're trying to say, and you're not like straight out saying this, you're kind of saying it, so it's kind of like a mystery a little bit. You have to try to figure out yourself.
So the symbolism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that too. I like that because it's so deep.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of rich meaning. Mm-hmm. What about you?
I really like using my own style to express opinion. Like when we did our History Mysteries unit, we took a theory and if we agreed on it or not. And I really like to elaborate on certain topics.
That's great. So you gravitate toward opinion writing. You like being able to put your thoughts.
Opinion and reviews mostly.
Oh, that's interesting. And what draws you to that?
I like the different sides people have to different things, like a movie. Some people like it, some people don't. A certain product, some people like it, some people don't. And the reasons why.
Dominique.
I think that's great, because it takes an analytical mind in a lot of ways to see those different sides to things and to come up with a fresh idea. And coming up with a fresh idea is often difficult. Mm-hmm. So for parents at home, in what way, what advice would you give them in order to stimulate their children's writing?
Well, number one, I would say the reading. It starts with reading. So I think read, even when they're in elementary school, upper elementary, I think still reading to them, because then you can get into sort of the heavier vocabulary or the inferences, things that maybe they're not picking up themselves. Keeping a journal, I know that sounds like a real basic one, but if you write every day, I think connecting it to the outside world. So we actually talk a lot about how we do writing more now almost than ever. Kids text, they have Instagram, what's the other stuff you have? Tweet, I don't know, they have all these, the emails, they have all these forms of communication, and writing is something that they do. So I think even pointing out, like when we were doing the haiku the other day, I said in a sense, haiku is like coming back in popularity, because when you tweet, you only have a certain amount of characters, And that's a haiku. You only get 17 syllables.
That's my aha moment. Wow, I hadn't thought about that.
So I think the more you can sort of connect it and make it fun, I think the on-demand writing, you know what? I think turning off the cell phones. I know I probably sound really old saying that, but I think you can't notice and write. And here's another little tip: the watermelon seed. Children tend to want to write these big watermelon stories, like my summer, my whole summer. That story's going to read like a list. Like we went here, then we went here, then we went here, then we went here. Pull a tiny little seed out of that summer. It could be the way the ice cream is dripping down your chin. That's a better story than a whole list of things you did. So we say we're not list makers, we're writers. So the watermelon seed is a big one.
Because most of my family is like abroad, they don't live in the United States, I was always encouraged as a little kid to write letters to them, and I still do, because it's really fun and I like telling them about what's going on here.
That's fantastic. That's how I got into writing. You know, long before emails and texts and all that, I was a big letter writer, and I would just, write a letter, send them out in bulk. Now, let me ask you, obviously your passion is memoir, personal experiences. Are there subjects that particularly attract you? Let's say you said opinion writing, and poetry, but fiction, travel, nonfiction. Are there certain subjects that you feel that you could be instantly creative with?
Well, I'm in future problem solving, and we research different projects, and our last topic was enhancing human potential, about how we can enhance humans to do better. And my mind is always the one going like, oh, what if this happened? And I could write about that.
Yeah, because we have to write like 3 paragraphs about our opinion and what should happen. So Dominique's usually the one who comes up with that, because I'm not very good with nonfiction writing.
But I'm sure you're very good at what you like to do, and what would that be, Zoe?
Probably fiction, or fiction mostly. Nonfiction, I add too much information and go so off topic. If I'm having a conversation with someone about something, I say we are talking about school, I get so off topic. Nonfiction is like you have a subject, one thing, and you can't go like out of that subject, I feel like. But fiction, it's like everywhere.
Well, I admire that, because I've written books on nonfiction, and I always admire fiction writers, people who can come up with a storyline and make up characters, and I think that's so creative. So I think we all have our strengths and the things that we're drawn to. And if you had to give advice to your peers about, like, someone who's kind of on the fence about writing, what little piece of advice would you give them?
I would say don't let other people put you down. Stay true to what you really want to do. Like, if you have an idea and people say, oh, it's weird, you should do something else. If it's really what you want to do, then you should do it.
That's great. What about you, Zoe? Anything?
Probably to try, because a lot of people, sometimes like writing class, they don't exactly try their hardest. They say, oh, I'll just write this out and then I'll be done and it'll be quick. But if you actually try, you might actually like writing, and if you don't, then you don't. But you should still try hard, no matter if you like it or you don't like it.
Well, thank you. I would say the future of writing is in very good hands, thanks to people like Erin Power. I want to thank Dominique Thomas and Zoe Malouf for being with us today, and happy writing on your trail.